So I'm going to make an apple and apricot cobbler. So cobbler is a little bit like a fruit crumble. So it's got the fruit mixture on the bottom, and then it's got a scone mixture on the top rather than a crumble mixture. This one's a little bit different because it's got a pinwheel scone mixture on it. So once I've made it, that'll make more sense to you. So I've got my dried apricots and I'm just chopping them into small pieces, so as small as you can get them, just into small chunks using your sharp knife. And I haven't checked the angle of my camera, so I'm coming off the screen so you can't actually see it very well. But as long as they're nice and small, because what you want is when you are cooking your apple and your apricots together in the syrup mixture, you want those apricots to soften right down, so the smaller they are, the better. Then I've got 2 just normal eating apples. You could use 1 big cooking apple if you want, but these are just some that I had in my fruit bowl. So I'm peeling my apple onto my paper towel, so it makes it quicker and easier to clean up. And then we need to take the core out of the apple. So we've peeled apples lots of times, or we've peeled different things lots of times, so you should be confident in using a peeler, but you won't have taken the core out of an apple in school. So there's different ways that you could do it. You can use an apple corer, which goes right through the middle of the apple, but most people don't have one of those in their house. So I'm going to show you how you would do it just with your normal vegetable knife. So you're going to chop your apple into quarters, so the flat end is on the board. I'm doing that with both of my apples so that I've got my quarters of each. And then I'm going to concentrate on taking the core out. So the core is obviously the middle part of the apple that we don't eat. I'm sure you've all had an apple before and you know what I mean by that. So you're just going to take your sharp knife and cut into the middle of the apple at an angle, and then your little core should just pop right out. So in at an angle on both sides, and then it just pops out. So all the seeds should come with it, and you're just left with the flesh of the apple that we're going to use to make our compote that goes in the bottom of the dish. Again, my angles aren't very good here. I'm just putting the knife in at a slight angle in towards the core, and then lifting your knife up the way it'll pop the core out. So you obviously do that with all of the quarters of your apple, so you're doing that 8 times. And then we need to make sure that we slice the apple nice and thin. So again, just the same as the apricot, the smaller or the thinner the fruit is, the more it's going to break down whilst it's cooking. And that's what we want. We don't want the apple to stay as it is at the moment. We want it to break down as it's heating up. So it should go quite mushy in the pot. So I'm taking the flat end of the apple and putting it on my board because it's the safest way to chop it. Got these seeds stuck to my finger. And then slicing as close to the edge as I can to get thin slices of apple. And then when I get too close to my fingers, using my bridge over the top. So my fingers are curled back behind the knife to start with. And then when I get too close to my fingers, I can bridge them over the top so that I don't cut the end of my finger. Then once I've sliced my apple nice and thin, it's going to go into my water and sugar mixture. So it's a kind of syrup that we're going to make. or a compote that goes in the bottom. And we simmer that on a low to medium heat for about 10 minutes until all the fruit is really soft. There's quite a lot of sugar in here with the water, so it's a really, really sweet recipe. And our fruit goes in with the sugar and water onto the heat on a low to medium heat for about 10 minutes. And make sure you keep going back and giving it a stir every now and again to make sure it's not sticking to the bottom of the pan. You can put other flavourings in there with it as well. You could put maybe some spices in. Cardamom goes quite well with apple, so you can have cardamom pods, but make sure you take them back out again if you put those in, because they are just for flavour, they're not for texture. You don't want to eat a cardamom pod. The texture of it isn't very nice. So I'm going back now to make my scone mixture. So just like we did a few weeks ago, we're going to put the self-raising flour into the large bowl along with our butter. Break the butter into small pieces, and then you're going to do the rubbing in method with the tips of your fingers until you have got the flour and the butter resembling breadcrumbs. So my fingers tips are rubbing the flour and the butter very, very quickly. The palms of my hands aren't touching the ingredients at all. And the faster your fingers move, the better. Give the bowl a good shake and any big bits will come to the top, and then you need to get rid of those. So your fingers are acting like a digger. They go from the very bottom of the bowl right the way to the other side, grabbing everything as you go, and then rubbing the flour into the butter. Then I've got more sugar, so this sugar is going into the scone mixture now. So it's a very sweet recipe. And then here's my milk. So I've just got a random amount of milk in my jug, and I'm just going to add it very gradually until I'm happy with the consistency of the dough. So I haven't actually measured my milk out. I'm just going to add it in about 15 spoons until I'm happy with the consistency of it. So once you've made scones once, you'll then know what the dough should feel like. So it shouldn't be too sticky, so it's all sticking to your hands, but it definitely shouldn't be too dry either, so that when you're rolling it out, it's not breaking up. So it's all about practice. Going right to the side of the bowl, making sure that all the dry ingredients are getting mixed into the milk in the middle. So that's about 3 15 spoons that I've used so far. And you can see that it's all coming together in a dough at the moment. So using my knife, I'm just pushing it against the side of the bowl until all the dry ingredients are mixed in with the wet ingredients. Then you need to get your hands in there. So that's, I've still got milk left. Just showing you that I've still got some left. You don't have to use all the milk if you don't need it. Bring it together with your hands. Any dry bits that are still at the bottom, make sure they get brought into the middle of the dough. And it's a bit like Play-Doh. That's the consistency of it. That's what you're looking for. So my hands are still relatively clean. That's not sticking to my hands at all. And it looks and feels a bit like Play-Doh. That's when you know you've got it right. So now I need to gently knead my dough on my surface. If it starts to get a little bit sticky, if the middle of the dough is a little bit wet, then you can put just a small amount of flour on your table just to stop it from sticking. But again, you don't want it to go too dry where it's all going to fall apart. I'm going to go and check my apple mixture just now, make sure I'm giving it a stir, and then come back to my dough. So I've got a little bit of flour on my table, and this time, so last time we wanted to start off with a circle, This time we want to start off with a rectangle because that's the shape we want to end up with. So I'm giving it a quick knead on my table, and then I'm going to use my chopping board as my template. So I want the dough to end up the same shape as my chopping board, or roughly the same shape. This can be a bit more difficult than doing it in a circle shape. I put a little bit of flour just on the top because it feels like it's sticking just a wee bit on my board. And then we're starting off with a rough rectangle shape and hopefully ending up with one as well. So I'm just raking about for my rolling pin right now. That's why it's always best to prepare all your ingredients and your equipment to start with. Then I'm rolling forward and back and giving it a quarter turn. Forward, back, quarter turn. You need to give it that quarter turn. If you don't, it'll stick to your board. Forward, back, quarter turn. So you can see that this time it's a little bit more difficult to get it into that rectangle shape. So you have to think about where you're putting the weight on your rolling pin. So I'm pushing towards the corners rather than straight up. So I'm thinking about the direction that I'm pushing the dough. A little bit more flour because it feels like it's starting to stick a bit. And then I have to put my rolling pin down and use two hands because it's getting too big. Don't try and do it with one hand or you'll rip it. Then up into the corners until you get it to the shape that you want and the size that you want as well. So you want it to be roughly 12 by 15 centimetres. So you should have one side that's slightly longer than the other, so that it's a rectangle. So it's not a perfect rectangle that I've got right now, but it's close enough. So then I'm going to take my butter and melt it in the microwave just for about 5-10 seconds. And then I'm going to use my pastry brush to brush the butter all over the top of the dough. That acts a bit like a glue. So it gives flavour, obviously, but it also helps to stick the sugar that I'm going to put on here in a second. So I'm painting it all over the top of the dough till I'm happy I've got it completely covered. Then I'm taking my demerara sugar and sprinkling it all over the top of my dough. I've had this sugar in my cupboard for quite a while, so the moisture started to get to it and it started to clump, but it doesn't matter. Sprinkling it all over the butter, and the butter's acting like a wee glue to stick it to the dough. And then I need to think about what way I'm going to roll this up. So to start with, I thought, right, I'm going to go from the short end and roll away from myself. And then I changed my mind because I thought to myself, I need 8 pieces out of this. So if I'm going to get 8 once I've rolled it up, I wouldn't manage to get that if I'd done it from the short end. So I'm going from the long end and rolling towards myself as tightly as I can. So I'm just pinching it along the edges as I go, rolling it towards myself. It's like you're rolling up a towel or something like that. Until it's all rolled up, stuck just a wee bit to the board, it's okay. And then I need to use my sharp knife to just trim the edges so they're nice and straight. And then I'm going to work out where I'm going to put my cuts before I do that. So I need 8 pieces out of this. So I'm testing first of all to make sure that I can get 8. and then cutting through, and you can see that nice spiral effect that we've got this time. So it's different to the scone mixture that we had done before. The skills are a little bit more difficult this time. And the presentation is, again, different, and I think it's really nice, the presentation of this one. So now my apples and apricots have been cooking in their syrup mixture for about 10 minutes. They've gone really soft and mushy, a bit like baby food. And I'm just putting that in the bottom of a dish. So this is just a small dish that I've got in my kitchen. You could use anything. You could use a cake tin if you've got one, or a silver foil like you would get from the Chinese, something like that, as long as you can put it in the oven. So it spreads over the bottom, and then I'm putting my pinwheels, the little scones, in a nice neat row across the top. If you've got a round tin, you could do it in a nice spiral effect, so it goes round in a circle. But mine is a rectangle, so I'm doing it in a nice neat rows. So each person would get 2 of the scones. And there we go. That's it. Out the oven, nice and golden brown after 20 minutes. And it was lovely.